Hello, welcome to the Craft House Magic Setter tutorials. My name's Ellie and today I'm going to show you how to make this cute little project bag with lots of little pockets and some handles. So I'm using this fat quarter bundle from February's Liberty Lazenby Quilt and Cotton collection that I've got in the shop. I will be having a different set of quilting cottons from Liberty every month. I pick 5 that go together really nicely. These are all from the same collection and my aim is to do a project every month for you guys that have purchased the actual bundles so that you have some ideas as to what to make with them. So today you will need at least a fat 1/8 bundle to actually complete the outside. If you've got a fat quarter, you'll be able to do the pockets in this fabric as well. I will also be putting together some kits to make these bags if you want to purchase the whole kit with the canvas and the wadding and the strapping fabric as well. So I've already cut out my pieces. So what you will need is 4 2.5-inch strips cut the width of a fat quarter, so this is perpendicular to the selvage. You need 4 2.5-inch strips, which comes up to just, I think it's like 21 inches long for each of these strips. So 4 each of these are all of your 5 fabrics. And then I've cut 4 pocket pieces. So I've cut 1 piece of each of the 4 colours, and that is 20.5 inches this way by 6.5 inches this way. So that's 4 pieces out of 4 of the fabrics. And then the other fabric, I've cut out 2 pieces of fabric to cover the strap material. So that's 3 inches by 12.5 inches. You need 2 of those, and then you've got 2 strap materials. This is a 1-inch width webbing, and I've cut it 12.5 inches for 2 lengths, for that's 1 each for each of the handles. And then you have this material here, which is the canvas, which was what I'm going to line it with. And this one is 20.5 inches across there by 15.5 inches down here, but then I've cut out 4-inch squares from each of the bottom corners, and that is your panel ready for your lining. And I've also cut out 2 pieces of wadding to do the sort of outside of the fabric with, and along with the strips. So I've used the canvas piece I've cut out 20.5 by 15.5 inches. I've cut out 5-inch squares in each of the corners, and then I've used that as a template to cut out this wadding. Now the wadding I'm using is an 80% cotton, 20% polyester wadding, and you need this composition to be able to do the stitch and flip technique. So you will need to cut all that out before we start, and then the first thing you're going to need is to have your strips and your wadding pieces together to do the side panels of the bag. So I've laid out all my fabric strips in the order that I'm going to apply them to the actual wadding. So this is my wadding piece, and I'm going to place my first strip on the edge of the bag. This bit is too long, but if you just put that into place and roughly trim it so that it's just over the length of the actual wadding, what we can do is, after we've done all the stitch and flip technique, we can go back and trim it to the right size afterwards. So you want it to line up on this edge, and I'm going to trim my fabric piece, and I'm just going to give myself a little bit of leeway over the edge there. I'm just going to trim it so that it isn't sort of flapping around and getting on my nerves. So the next piece I need to put down is the purple. That's what I've planned to do. I'm going to pop that on the top there, pin that in place, and then I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch along here. So I'm just stitching over that 1/4 inch to join these 2 strips together on top of the wadding. So that second strip is stitched onto that first strip, and I can open that out, finger press it, and give it a quick press with the iron, using it on medium heat. The reason why we're using a mainly cotton wadding is that I can get away with giving it a quick press. If you use 100% polyester wadding, it's more likely to melt and mark your iron. So you can see now I've pressed this after I've stitched and flipped it. I'm just going to trim this roughly. There's actually quite a lot of excess there, but that's absolutely fine. I can then get my next strip, and I'm keeping it in the same order as I've got my strips organised here, and I'm going to put right sides together, pin it and stitch and flip the same way. And I'm going to work my way across the panel. When I get to the point where there's a longer section, I just make sure that I'm stitching right to the end of this longer section, but just carrying on all the way along. So I've stitched, and I'm going to flip back that fabric to cover up the piece of fabric that juts out where I've cut out the 5-inch square, and give it a quick press. Don't worry about having to fold back this section to make any seam at all, because we will be trimming back that material to where the wadding is afterwards. So you just want to continue to put your next strip down. So you've got your fabrics aligned on this side, stitch down here the full length of where the wadding is, and then flip it again. So I'm going to work my way right across the panel, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. A good tip is to make sure that you've smoothed out your wadding as you're placing your next fabric over there. Just pin it nicely so your wadding isn't sort of stretched out, but it's smoothed so that it's nice and flat. Once you've done your 5 strip repeat once, you can repeat it once more. So I've now attached all those pieces to the outer wadding piece, and what I need to do is go round and trim all these edges to where the actual wadding goes up to. So I'm going to use a ruler and just trim all across there. There we are, that's a side panel done, and you need to do the same with the other piece of wadding with the same strip to make the other side. So I've got 4 of the pocket panels. This is 20.5 inches across the top and 6.5 inches deep. So we've got 4 of these. So I've paired them up so that they sort of go nicely together. So I'm going to sew these 2 together and these 2 together. Put your materials right sides together and just sew down the long sides on both of these. So we're creating 2 nice big pockets on either side of the inside of the bag. I'm just going to pop a few pins in there to keep it together. That's one. Do the same to the other side. And go over to the sewing machine. We have our 2 pockets sewn together. I'm going to turn them the right way out. Do the same for both. I've moved this seam line. I can feel that there's the opposite seam line is sort of to one side. So I'm going to carefully get the iron and just press this seam without messing around with the other one first. And then turn it over and do the same. Make sure that the seam isn't sort of twisted and it's all facing the same way all the way across, so that you can then flatten it all down. And when that seam's flat, you can then push the seam so actually you've got the top showing in the opposite colour, and do the same on both sides. And then you're going to be able to sew that to the lining of your bag and have this lovely bit of contrast showing. So I'm just going to give that a press so that the contrast is showing on the inside. Like so. You can do it whichever way around you want it to, and you're going to do the same for both pockets. Right, so I've pressed the 2 of these, and I've just made sure that the seam allowance actually goes up to the edge, so it gives it a little bit more stability in that top edge, because there's basically 4 layers of fabric just in that edge section. And I'm going to go and top stitch in the ditch across those 2 pockets, ready to sew them to the lining. I'm using a special stitch in the ditch foot here that's got a metal plate to follow in the centre, but you don't need it. You can just stitch where the fold is all the way along. So I've placed the pocket on the canvas part of the lining, and I want to make sure that it's about 1/2 inch from where you cut out for the box bottom, either side. Pin that in place, and I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch from the bottom of the pocket all the way along. Pop a couple of extra pins in there just to make sure it doesn't wiggle out of place as I'm stitching it. So I'm now going to mark on my pocket where I'm going to stitch along to create smaller pockets. So I want there to be a pocket that's in line with the corner of the bag. So I've measured 1/4 of an inch this way from the line so that when I stitch down there, that will be in line with the sort of corner. If I put a little mark for myself with a pencil, an arrow showing that I need to stitch down this side. I'm going to do the same on this bit over here. So 1/4 of an inch away from this line into the centre so that you've got a stitch line where the corners of the bags are going to go. Right, I've put an arrow so I know it's this side and this side, and I can change my mind on the two sides where I want to put my stitch line. So I think I might put one in the centre of this one, but you could do smaller pockets to put in needles and things as well. So this section here is 10.5 inches. So if I measure 5 1/4, that should come about the centre. It might look a bit odd because obviously this isn't, because you're stitching that side, it sort of puts you off. It doesn't look like the centre because this masking tape's in the way, but that's 5 1/4 inches. And then I'm just going to make sure that this is level by using the square corner of my ruler, and do the same with the other two. I eyeballed it into place to start with. There's 5 inches between these two stitch lines, so I want to put another one about 2 inches here. I'll put that into place. Oops. And make sure it's square. So this line is 2 inches from the corner point. And so we've got 3 inches there. So I've got a small pocket, a slightly larger pocket, and a larger pocket still. So I could potentially put needle tips and sort of cables in these two pockets and other bits and bobs in the other ones. So I'm going to go ahead on the sewing machine and do those lines of stitching. Right, so I have marked and stitched the same pockets on the both sides so that you'll have pockets right away around the inside of the bag. So I'm going to pop those to one side and we can prepare the handles. Now we've got 2 pieces of fabric and 2 strap materials, so that you're going to wrap each of these so that it looks nice and pretty to match the rest of your bag. So you've got your fabric and your strap on the ironing board. This is 12.5 inches by 3 inches long, and you're going to fold it over and give it a press. I normally finger press it first. Give it a press. Wait for that to cool down before you do the next bit. Then you can open that back up and pop your strap in the middle there. That should go right from end to end, and then you can fold in the edge over the strap material while that crease line is lined up with the other side, and give that a press as well. And then you just leave that to cool down for a minute. You could leave a clapper on it or a piece of wood or something just to make sure it sets closed. Once that's cooled down, you can fold that over and work out where this piece needs to be folded in so that it's in alignment with it. I have then gone across and eyeballed it, but you could measure it all the way along if you wanted to. Like so. Leave it to cool down. Then fold these pieces together and clip them in place. I'm using some of these clips. I've had these years, but I do have some of the rainbow ones on the website. There we go. I'm going to do the same to both of these. So I've got the straps next to the sewing machine, and I'm just literally going to stitch 1/8 of an inch down this side and down this side to finish it off nicely on both of those straps. So this is the strap that's stitched down 1/8 of an inch either side. I am going to fold the centre of this strap in, just because I think that it gives a nicer finish and a sort of smaller area to grip onto when you've got your strap on your bag. I'm going to measure 2 inches from the end here and just clip it like that and do the same with both sides. I've got a handy ruler on my sewing machine here. Like so, and I'm going to put some extra clips in between, and I'm trying to line up the edge of both edges here and also the stitch line as well if you can, like so. And I'm going to stitch on top of where we've done 1/8 of an inch on the edge of the strap there, from here to here, so that you've left 2 inches on either end not stitched together, and it'll just give you an extra sort of bit of stability and a narrower strap when you're lifting up your bag. Right, so I'm now about to pin my handles to the outside of the bag. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring 6.5 inches from the edge here, putting my strap in place and then pinning it down. So what I've done is I've got the sort of open edge facing up of the handle, and then I'm going to pin it this side as well, 6.5 inches from the edge, in line with the edge of the panel, like so. But you can move the handles wherever you'd like. So I'm going to just quickly tack these down 1/8 of an inch from the edge, just so that they're in place before we go any further. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to add a little bit of fabric with my logo on the inside of the bag. I'm going to zigzag stitch all the way around, and I'm going to do it at this point so that you can't see the stitches on the inside of the actual lining fabric. I've also got some of these lobster clasps. I've popped a little bit of ribbon through there, and I'm going to stitch it just above the pocket. This is what I add to all of my project bags I sell in my shop, and I'm going to just tack it at the edge so that the zigzag stitches are within the seam allowance. There we are. So that will be all enclosed in the seam allowance, but it's just tacked it in place. I might be cheeky on this one and do one either side, so I can pop stitch markers and things on this little lobster clasp on both sides of the bag. Right, so we have our lining panels prepared and the outer panels prepared with the handles tacked onto them, and we're going to put the lining onto the outer fabric. Right, so what I'm going to do is put right sides together with the top of the bag lined up here and pin across the top. I'm going to do that the same with the 2 pieces. Obviously we've got 2 of each. Make sure you've lined it up nicely all the way across. There we are. So this first one I'm going to stitch all the way across the top. On this second one I'm going to do the same, layer it up so that we've got the 2 top edges together, but we're only going to stitch just at the edges. And the reason why I'm leaving this gap is that we can turn it the right way, and this is going to be the best place to do it with, because I've lined it with this canvas fabric, because it's going to be very thick to top stitch the gap closed. So the best area to do it is across the top of the bag, and then we can top stitch all the way around the top of the bag once we've assembled it. So I'm going to leave a gap that's a good inch or so either side of handle on there. So I'm going to stitch here out, and leave quite a big gap on this piece, but then stitch all the way across on this piece. I'm going to sew the one with the gap first, so I don't forget to leave one with a gap. I'm going to do 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on the top here. Right, so I've done that. This particular one is the one with the gap. You can see there's quite a big gap there, but the edge pieces are stitched together. So I've opened that up. I'm going to put the one that I've stitched all the way across right sides together, so that we've got lining pieces facing and the outer sides facing, and we're going to line those edges up. So first of all, I've got this edge here. I'm going to make sure that the seams are nestled, so this top seam's going that way and the bottom seam is going that way. I'm going to pop a pin in there to hold it together. I'm going to pin all the way along the sides. Make sure you tuck in the lobster clasps so that they don't get sewn sort of to the inside. So that side's all pinned. I'll do the other one. Same again, tuck that lobster clasp in. There we are, those are lined up, and then I'm going to move to the bottom edges and the inside bottom edge as well. Pin those together. So we need to sew all the way down this edge, across this edge, and this edge at the back here. So we're leaving the squares alone for the minute. We're just going straight down those edges. What I would suggest you do is you use 1/4 inch seam allowance on the wadded side of the bag, and then add an extra 1/8 inch to your 1/4 inch seam allowance to make sure that that inside fits nicely inside the wadded side. So 1/4 inch, and then add another 1/8 inch to that 1/4 inch seam allowance on the canvas side. So I'm now going to stitch down the wadded side 1/4 inch first. Once we've hit that stitch line where you've actually come onto the canvas, add an extra 1/8 inch. You can see here that my 1/4 inch foot comes to here, and then I've got an extra 1/8 inch, so I'm measuring it to the edge of my foot here and working all the way along around the canvas. We now need to address the box bottom areas, so I'm going to open out the square that we cut out and bring those seams together, and make sure that you've got one on the top going that way, one on the bottom going that way. Pop a pin in, then I'll show you a bit more clearly what we've done. So we've got these two edges folded over together so that these edges meet nicely. I don't normally pop a pin on the corners, so I just make sure that they're lined up before I put them under the sewing machine. You just need that pin where the join is in the seam. So I'm using the extended seam allowance here, 1/4 inch plus an 1/8 inch. So you can see that's sewn together. There's a boxed area, and we're going to do the same for all 4 corners. So don't panic that you are sort of enclosing your seams. You have got that gap that you've left at the top of the bag to turn it the right way. So I'm now going to the wadded side, and I'm just being careful to make sure you put your fingers in the corners just to make sure that you've got a nice clean fold there and it's all nice and flat. I would on this side maybe put some pins in the corners just to make sure it stays nice and flat before you sew it. So this side, because you're doing the wadding, you are sticking to the regular 1/4 inch seam allowance because this is the outside. Right, so we have all the box bottoms sewn together, and we're going to go through that gap in the side and turn it all the right way. So I'm going to pull all that through. So I would just make sure you run your finger over all the seams just to make sure that they're sewn really nicely and there's no gaps in the stitching. And then once you've done that, you can post the lining into the bag. The canvas gives it a little bit more stability so that it sort of sits up straight. Obviously we've got this bit here that's not sewn together yet, but I'm just going to titivate the rest of the bag until it's all nice and neat. I like to run my thumbnail across the seams and tuck them in nicely. What I will do is across the edge here I'll put some clips, and once I've clipped all the area that's already stitched down, I'll then go to folding in that nice bit of seam allowance that is still open. Right, so we are on this edge where the seam allowance is still open. I'm going to carefully fold in 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides and just pin it like so. And then once we've done that, we can actually think about top stitching it closed. I think we're there. So what we need to do now is top stitch all the way around an 1/8 inch from the edge, just to secure everything in place and make sure that the seam allowance is closed. And it not only closes the seam allowance, but it also stitches the top edge of the bag so that it keeps it in place rather than it sort of puffing out, if that makes sense. So I'm going to work my way around. What I like to do is start at the side seam and go all the way around. It's finished. I'm really pleased with how this design's come out. I hope you enjoy sewing it as well. The canvas on the inside gives it that little bit of extra sturdiness, so it holds itself up nicely, but you still get the gorgeous colours of the fabric on the outside. And you've got all these lovely pockets on the inside that you can pop lots of bits and bobs in. It's actually nice and square in the bottom, gives you lots of space for projects. It's like a little basket that you can have next to your sort of work seat with your knitting in, or sewing or whatever. You could put other little bags inside. There's so many lovely pockets inside, and it's really nice to be able to see the different fabrics on the inside and the outside of the bag. So the canvas gives the bag quite a lot of strength. It will hold up sort of by itself. You could put the canvas on the outside if you wanted to. But there we go. Let me know what you're using yours for. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And I shall see you in the next tutorial. Bye!